you do well in any career, and especially in the film world, when you can kind of step outside the matrix or realize that everyone's kind of playing a game. There's rules to learn and there's rules to break, and that success kind of comes from learning when to keep the rules and when to realize that they're complete bullshit.
Adam Sjoberg is a documentary and commercial filmmaker that's traveled to over 60 countries working on both independent and full-scale productions. His first documentary, Shake the Dust, executive produced by the legendary rapper Nas, chronicles the influence of breakdancing and its ties to the slums and ghettos around the world. We talk about breaking free from the matrix on this week's podcast and how to define your own path. He gives some of the most practical and actionable advice I've heard for aspiring storytellers. And we also discuss the importance of learning the business side of your creative path. So that's something that I try to cover on as many of these podcasts as possible, because if you're not getting the business side down, if you're not figuring out how to make money from your art, then you are likely not going to be able to keep creating it. Do you have a question for me or my guest? If so, you can send it in to hello@mattdiavella.com, record a short audio or video, keep it under 2 minutes, and ask me whatever is on your mind. Can be personal to you, to me, to my guests. Just want to try to help you guys get to the bottom of the drudgery that you're going through. So again, send those in to hello@mattdiavella.com. I truly love hearing from you guys. I also love hearing from you in the form of an iTunes review. These iTunes reviews have been hugely helpful. I can't think of the word right now because I've been working all day and I'm tired. I have been getting a lot of these reviews and ratings in through iTunes, and it's been like popping up the Ground Up Show on iTunes on the business charts. It's been in the top 200. We've been like 130 for a bit. And I know that these have been helping. So if you can do that, head over to iTunes, leave a review, 15 seconds. That's it. That's all it takes. And you can help us change the world, or maybe just help somebody on their path. Maybe we can just do that. All right. I'm hoping this podcast will help you on your path as well. This is Adam Sjoberg. Enjoy the podcast. You're listening to The Ground Up Show, a podcast that inspires creatives to make meaningful content and pursue their passions. My name's Matt Diavella, and I'm a filmmaker best known for the Netflix documentary Minimalism. And I'm sitting down with creators to talk about their process, the lessons they've learned, and how to make an impact. Cool, man. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate you being here. I feel like it's exciting anytime I get another filmmaker, especially another doc filmmaker, because I feel like there's a lot that we have to share in common. And one of my favorite parts about these conversations is like the struggles and the things that we go through to figure out how to tell a story. Yeah, man, it really is. And like, so it's, for me, that's been the most rewarding part of the podcast, to be able to have other doc filmmakers on, to be like, yeah, man, like it's not as easy as it looks. And a lot of times when you put a film out there or put a project out there, the decisions seem obvious when you're looking at the entire thing cut together and you're like, oh yeah, of course that's the way it is.
Yeah.
But then to actually see the behind the scenes and to see like what it took to make something is a whole nother story.
For sure.
Cool. So we'll get into that. But like for now, like what do your days look like now? Like the past couple months, what have you been working on? What kind of projects you've been digging into?
That's a great question. So the last few months, I have two producing partners that I work with as well. And so sometimes when I say we, that's what I'm referring to. But the last few months have been developing, really. I'm working on scripts for features, non-documentary feature films, which is exciting. Developing documentary, either potentially a series, but we're still trying to figure that out. But working on a documentary about my own experience. It's a little bit more of a personal story and dealing with race and issues of my own family's history in the Deep South, as my ancestors were slave owners, just kind of talking about some of these hard conversations around race that we're having in America. And as a white male, what does it mean to think about these things for myself, and what are my responsibilities? So that's a project that's like gonna take time to develop. I've been dreaming it up for years of a little bit of cash in the door to develop it, but we're still trying to figure out what it looks like.
That's a fascinating topic, and
Yeah.
I'm sure a challenging one.
Yeah.
A very nuanced conversation to have, but
Yeah.
also like you said, that seems like I've never heard somebody even having that conversation to be like, yeah, let's talk about
Yeah.
the shit that went down and
Yeah.
you know, my ancestry and you know, my past.
Yeah, I mean, I think race is obviously an incredibly important thing to talk about in any country. Our country has a long, fraught history with it, and I think that in order to move forward, like, there's all of this sort of political posturing around both sides of the issue of race. You know, there's people that think that we're past it somehow. There's people that, you know, and I think where I land is like, we can't actually move past something that we can't talk about and we can't be afraid to mess up in how we talk about it. Like, we need to be able to move forward and put one step in front of the other and actually have hard conversations and be gracious with one another when we say something wrong or when we are wrong, you know? So that, by making it really personal, I hope that it can be an example of how a conversation can be had around the topic.
Right.
So.
Well, because in a lot of ways we're a very reactionary culture, and because of the way, man, like if you just look at the way media has changed over the past 15 years, it's so fragmented. It's all over the place. You're not just going to one source to find out the truth. So then, you know, if somebody says something that maybe sounds a little bit taboo or just sounds like uncomfortable, and you're like, well, look at this person speaking from a place of privilege or whatever.
Yeah.
And you're like, I'm just trying to have a conversation. But then there's like 15, 20, 100 blogs or bloggers that are going to say, ooh, that's going to be a story. I got my headline.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh, that really hurts the conversation.
Yeah. Well, and I think, you know, in a sense, I'm as a white privileged American male, like, I'm not intimidated by Time's Up or that the idea that that I've had my turn or something, or that white men have had their turn, and now we need to open up space for other people to have a voice. That has been a big part of my entire career, is trying to like create opportunities for other people to tell their story. But that doesn't mean, so I think in some ways my role as a white male is to step aside in certain ways or to make room for other people, but it's also to have, I think it's not to just shut up. You know, I think white men also need to be outspoken and ask questions and be open-minded and help have those hard conversations and be an example. And I don't know. Yeah,
I think, well, it's like, I think we need to start looking at people on an individual level, and you know what I mean, like that, and you know, to look past race. Obviously, like that is the end goal, but then to do that, like you said, you need to talk about it. So let's talk about it, but also let's not discriminate because you happen to be born a certain race or a certain color, be it white or otherwise. So starting off the podcast.
Yeah, let's just wade
note.
Right into race. Two white guys on a podcast wading into the hardest topic you can have.
We just gave him the headline. That's the headline for the blog. No, that's cool because I don't talk about that kind of stuff all the time. So it's nice to always delve into it a little bit. I feel like there's always something to learn, and especially about you know, topics that I don't often talk about. But anyway, let's go back. Like, I want to learn about how you became a filmmaker. When did you first start taking an interest in film and thinking that this is something you wanted to do?
Well, I was always a really creative kid, and I literally like saved my lawn mowing money to buy a video camera when I was a kid. And I always sort of thought in movies and made documentaries about my grandma or whatever, made horror films like with my friends. But for some reason, filmmaking seemed really inaccessible. So by the time I was graduating from high school and going into college, it didn't seem like a logical possibility. But then I came to California and I actually studied photography, which somehow seemed more practical and more pragmatic, and slowly sort of shifted my opinion on what was possible. Like, just moving out to California in general as a kid who grew up in the Midwest in Indiana was very eye-opening, and the world started to feel like there was kind of anything was possible in a way, and there was a very transformative season of my life where I was like, oh, I can literally go anywhere. I can do anything, which transitioned really well into documentary filmmaking because I was doing the photography thing, I graduated from college and really quite like off the bat was brought onto a small documentary film team in Thailand where I was the still photographer, not the I was just there to kind of, it was a scrappy team and I was just there to take photos of behind the scenes and stuff that could be used later. And that opened up the door for basically constantly traveling with nonprofits and organizations doing work to help, doing photography work. And while I was doing that, this was in 08, 09, the Mark II came out. The technology changed. The camera that I was using to take photos could now shoot film or video. And now this latent thing that had always kind of been within me and that it was really natural to me, I just started exercising. I started doing little short video projects for people. And the idea for my first documentary came around, and I just started on my own dime running around and filming that whenever I could. So.
Dude, the Mark II just changed everything. But it was, for me, I was resistant to get it because I had a Canon XHA1, which was like
so you started out from the get-go in production, in video production.
Yeah, film was my thing. Like when I was in high school, I got a Sony Handycam.
Nice.
And I would just record projects then. I graduated high school in 2006. So that's like all they had at the time. And then, recorded the little mini DV tape. And then it was a couple years later, just saving up money, working at a grocery store.
What grocery store?
AMP.
Nice.
Are you familiar? Super fresh. They're kind of they actually went bankrupt. It's actually a long story, and I've talked about it on the podcast. But I was sued for $7 million for making a parody rap video in the grocery store.
Wow. Okay. I need to catch up on that episode.
Yeah. It's called Produce Paradise, and this was like back when YouTube was first starting, and I was actually really into sketch comedy at first, and that's what I really wanted to do. And nobody would film me. You know what I mean? I didn't know anybody who had a camera who was good at filmmaking, so I was like, I'll learn it myself, and then maybe I can put myself in sketches. Made that video, got sued, and then it's so bizarre. But then like a year later, we're going through arbitration and everything that goes with something like a big lawsuit like this, and then they ended up saying, listen, if you guys just don't ever work for us again, we'll give you and your brother $2,500 each. And we were like, yeah, sure, deal. And then I took that money and then bought my Canon XHA1, which is a professional camcorder camera. Still shot to tape, but it was like leaps and bounds above the Sony Handycam. And it was also like top of the line at that time for that level, for a camera that cost $3,000 to $5,000.
Right.
Even then, I feel like, to go a step higher, there wasn't much there. I mean, not that I could afford a $10,000, $15,000 camera, but now I feel like the market's opened up where there's tons of cameras in that category.
It's unbelievable, really.
So then, it was that, and then I had that camera all the way up until the 5D Mark II came out. And I remember being kind of hesitant. I was like, it seems like a step back just because of the way it looked. I'm like judging this camera because it looks like a photography camera. And I'm like, clients aren't going to take me seriously. Like, is this actually...
Well, and it always felt strange to me that we had this camera that could shoot video, but you had to do so many things to the camera to make it function like a proper video. I mean, there was so much like aftermarket or third-party stuff that came out to try and support both on an audio level and the rig that you had to kind of set up for it, which is really just the way I don't think I realized at the time because I started in photography. That's just the way it is anyway. I mean, when you have any camera, you build it out, and depending on the circumstances and what you're shooting. But
it's certainly like I see the value in. I shot my first doc on a Canon C300, and like one person running around with a couple wireless microphones and a boom mic attached to my camera, and the fact that it had everything integrated and the quality alone, but like I have 2 XLR inputs. Yep. Like I could just clip everything to this one camera and just keep it built out. And like 90% there.
I love the C300.
I miss it, dude.
Yeah, I
miss it. Like, well, and I'm actually in the point now where I'm trying to figure out what camera to get next. I actually got a Red last year. I got the Epic W.
Nice.
When I was planning on doing more corporate work. And then literally like a couple months after I bought it, I was like, yeah, I'm going to stop doing client work.
Yeah. And now, then you just sold it?
I still have it.
You still have it?
Yeah.
You rent it out, or?
I like to use it to shoot YouTube videos. It's so bad.
Funny.
It's so over the top. It's not minimalist at all.
Yeah.
I'm actually, I would love to talk to you about that later, but because I don't I just moved to LA, so I need to like find rental houses. I don't know who would rent it out. I personally, I don't know if I want that time and energy.
Yeah,
to
it's
be
a thing.
Yeah, to like have to worry about like. Then you got to make sure it's insured, and there's potential that it could get damaged, and it's a business basically when you start renting out your gear.
Yeah.
But so now I'm just kind of, I don't know, what's like the camera to go to now? Like, is there one that you use a lot or that?
Oh man, I mean the A7s. I don't so much of the time now. I have a DP on the jobs that I have where we have a conversation about what makes the most sense, and I lean into them as being the more informed of the two of us now. You know, where I say, okay, well, what do you think? And I kind of go with their gut. But last year, I would say we use the Alexa, any of the Alexas, the most. From the Mini to the, and now I'm gonna seem really ignorant on models here, but
I forget what the hell the Mira, whatever.
Yeah,
that's like a higher end. But like, how much? Like, what's the workflow look like in post? Because that's the big thing where I'm like, the Red, you can't shoot a documentary on it, and you can't shoot an independent.
If I was, because I'm not in the middle of production on a documentary right now. If I was, I honestly don't know what I would do now. I think I would probably play around with a couple different setups, and I've screenshotted other doc filmmakers recently, some of their setups to do some more research, because I don't think I would shoot with the Canon anymore if I was going to do a feature, if I was diving back into a feature right at this moment. But I don't know.
Yeah.
It would kind of depend too, you know. The last doc that I did was 2000. I mean, we were shooting in 2014, and 15 was maybe the last stuff that I got. And we shot on kind of everything. It was the nature of the doc. We had everything from cell phone footage to my Mark III to a Sony that I don't even know the model of. It was a DP that I hired out of Korea. So we kind of had to shoot on everything, and it has, you know, not a super clean look as a result, but it was a political doc, and it didn't kind of merit the same visual consistency. So yeah, I don't know. I would ask you the same question.
Well, I think that the 4K is now a big deal, and especially for you're looking at end deliverables like Netflix, Hulu. The distributors want 4K.
Yeah.
So a project I'm working on now, we actually shot it with C300 Mark IIs in 4K. It was like a live talk. So we had 5 camera setup, and then it's this kind of live talk that was done. And then we're going to intercut that with like cutaways to these guys' childhood and how they grew up and some thoughts on consumerism. So I went with the C300 Mark II. It was kind of like, again, a conversation.
And you're happy with how that came out?
It looks beautiful. It looks great. And that was a conversation with the DP, and it was like, you know, this is the budget we have. And he's like, well, you know, if you had the budget, we could go with the, you know, Alexas and, you know, but then the thing is like, and when you're doing a big production like this, especially when you're putting a lot of energy into 1 or 2 days of filming, you have to rent out that gear, which costs a certain amount of money. Right. But then you also need the insurance to cover 200,000, 300. Actually, right. we had coverage for $200,000 in gear, and that was with the C300 Mark IIs. Imagine if you had like a $80,000 camera.
Yeah.
Then you have to have, you're talking like $500,000, $600,000 in coverage, and like that would cost way more money.
You know, when my company, we do some commercial production, and we had a lot of these kind of one-off 2-3 day shoots where we have, you know, our line item for rentals is $20,000-$30,000 for the rental, not for the cost of the equipment. That's obviously exorbitantly higher than that. And so eventually we were able to we just bought our own insurance, and we make some of it back.
Enough talk about gear. But we will probably talk a little bit more about gear, because I think it's important for each project.
Well, and I actually have one more question about that for you, which is, if you were on a complete run and gun one-man show, you're out in Southeast Asia filming something that you have to be really, really scrappy on, what would your setup be? But you want it to look cinematic and look good.
Yeah, I think maybe it's, well, I honestly, like, I wouldn't do these cameras, the Sony A7Ss.
Yeah.
I just think that they're they don't have enough built into them that you'd
Right.
have to have too much assembled. But then also you think about like run and gun, you want to be able to actually have something that feels comfortable in your hands and it's got some weight to it.
It's too small though, so it doesn't have enough weight to it.
Yeah,
That would
it's
be
way
my-
too small.
Yeah.
And then, you know, I haven't done a whole lot. I mean, the last time I did that run and gun type doc was a few years ago, and that was when I did it with the C300, and like that for me was perfect. So
It's whatever the equivalent of what would the equivalent.
it might be the C300 Mark II now
Yeah.
with the 4K. I think
Yeah.
that would probably be my option. Although
Yeah.
I feel like we're on the verge. I always feel like we're on the verge of like, oh, there's going to be a new camera that's just going to wipe that out.
Yeah.
But the FS7 to me is too clunky. It's too big. It's got
Yeah.
the gyrating arm. It's just like
Yeah.
too much. I'm like, and it's like it's heavy as shit. I'm like
Yeah.
the C300 is so compact that I would probably do that. It's got 2 XLR inputs, and I'd go with the boom as well.
Yeah.
So that way I have 1 or 2 wireless mics if I need it. And then what I didn't utilize enough was the 24 to 105 Canon
Yeah.
lens.
It's a great lens.
Right. It's a great lens.
It's not macro, which
yeah.
doesn't matter most of the time. But
Yeah, you don't need it much. The biggest problem is that it's like a f4, so it's
Yeah.
you can really only use it in daylight. You
Yeah.
can't use it at night. So I would do that, and then maybe like take a 24 millimeter or 50 millimeter for low light situations or
Yeah.
interviews.
Yeah.
But then I feel like that could probably that's like it.
Yeah.
It'd be pretty compact.
Yeah.
You wouldn't need a lot. Although to me now it's like, I don't know if I'm open to doing that kind of stuff still, like that run and gun stuff, but I have a preference towards not. Like I want
Yeah.
I want 3-person crew for a shoot.
Yeah, I think it would depend for me. I would do something if it was like really exciting. Like if it was like you're gonna go into the jungle with this like crazy guy, and I don't know, for the experience of it, I would absolutely do it. I don't want to do something that feels unnecessarily encumbered by, I don't know, like I wouldn't do a run and gun thing just to like for the paycheck, just because I'm like, oh, I need to do this,
Exactly. Like I would have to really care about the project. I have to be passionate about it. And there is something, as much as I like hiring out other DPs and cinematographers, I'm still very much connected to the act of shooting. And there is something to say about like having control of the camera if you're creating an intimate kind of piece.
Yeah, for sure.
When you think about something like, did you see Wiener?
Which was fantastic.
Phenomenal documentary, and like honestly, like not the best cinematographers in the world, and like the audio was pretty shaky.
Yeah.
But the story was incredible, and it was personable. It's like, you hear their voices, the filmmakers' voices towards the end, and you see the interaction between like Anthony looking up at the filmmakers. So it's like there's an intimacy to that.
He seemed to regret from like the moment the camera was on. He seemed to regret, but he just allowed everything to get filmed, which is just mind blowing.
Yeah, the best part is like one of the filmmakers is like, "Why are you letting us do this?"
So good.
But yeah, no, I think that
there's an intimacy there. I mean,
Yeah.
I think as a documentary director, you have to be a DP, even if you have a DP. Like on my second film, I had a variety of DPs that I was working on, but I shot a lot of it myself too. There was it was me and this North Korean artist, so there was like tons of hours where I just hung out in the studio with him. He was painting and I was filming, and it was just this like dance of just the two of us, and a relationship that developed over like sake that probably wouldn't have happened the same way if there'd been a big crew the whole time.
Right. Yeah, I did talk to a doc filmmaker early on with the podcast who was like, I like to spend a day or two at least just like hanging with somebody, getting to know them before you start filming.
Yeah.
Just because there are walls that people build up, and when you're filming somebody, especially in a doc style where you're following them around, there's not much opportunity for you to talk.
Yeah.
So
well, I think especially I've always done that, but it's especially because I think that would maybe be different under different circumstances. Like if I was doing like a takedown piece on some politician, it might be different. But most of the docs I've done, I'm working with people that, or the subject matter, have been sort of objectified in some way, and I don't want to further that. Like I want to make sure that they know that I'm there to help them tell their story and not try and like capitalize on their story or something like
right, take advantage
of it or take advantage of their circumstances. So I think it's important that, and my second documentary was about a North Korean who didn't even show his face, so there was a lot of trust I had to build anyway. I had to he had to allow me to film him at all. And so there had to be a building of a relationship there.
Man, the hardest, the most difficult thing, I think, because it's so uncontrollable and it's so much a matter of luck and serendipity, is finding the story. Like, come on, how it's some, I mean, and a lot of times the story kind of finds you. And like, I had a chance to chat with Matthew Heineman, who directed Cartel Land. And like, he was just reading a magazine. And then he's like, oh, this is interesting. There's like these kind of groups on the border that are vigilante and are stopping people from crossing over. He's like, that's a story. That could be a film. But it's like, man, how do you find the stories? How did you come across your docs?
When I made Shake the Dust, which was my first movie, I didn't know what I was doing at all. I mean, I was just a kid who was running around with a camera, and the story was about breakdancers, b-boys, b-girls that grew up mostly in slums, in post-conflict areas, in places where you wouldn't necessarily, as a Westerner, think that there would be hip-hop culture or breakdancing. And I didn't ever, one of the challenges of that film is that I never really found a powerful through line, or I never chose to really look for it. I think I was trying to create like a surf film out of breakdancing, like I wanted something that was really dignified, that wasn't politically driven, that didn't have this like, well, look at all the political situations in these countries. It really was supposed to be about dancing. And I think that if there's a flaw in that film, it's that I never really found a powerful singular storyline that kind of ties it all together. Whereas with my second film, I didn't want to spend 9 years waiting for that story to bubble up. So I got connected with Sun Mu, this North Korean artist. He was willing to let me do a documentary about him. And then I sort of waited, and I went and did a bunch of other stuff. And then I found out that he was doing a big show in Beijing, which was pretty historical. It was this massive show at a big gallery, and it was the first time a North Korean artist was going to have a big show in China without the sanctioning of the North Korean regime. And so I was like, okay, well, that can be my North Star. I can take 1.5 years or 2 years max and do a story about this artist as he prepares for this big show. And likely there's going to be some amount of drama that's going to unfold around that. But even if there's not anything like super dramatic that happens, that gives me an arc. And I can then use that as kind of the backbone, and then fill in the rest with his backstory and interviews with him and learn about the issue and all this stuff. And then that was how I found the story there. Was I tried to find some big event that could kind of be the hook that everything hung on. And then the second thing that happens with documentary filmmakers, or that doesn't always happen, but that you want to happen, is that something big happened. And that's that this show got massively shut down by the Chinese police and the North Korean government, and it was this big thing, which created tension and payoff that I wouldn't have had otherwise. So I think it's a combination of being smart enough from my last experience of making a doc to know, okay, I've got to have like a skeleton. There's got to be something that's kind of like the bones of this story that's going to hold it together. And then with documentary films, like with the Anthony Weiner film, like so much, I mean, they could never in a million years have known or planned that all of the stuff was going to go down that went down in that movie.
Well, yeah, that was before all the scandal. Like, it was before any of these Weiner scandals came out.
Well, and it was like one Weiner scandal after another while they're filming, which is just crazy.
And they captured
literal
everything.
Weiner scandals. So
yeah, that's one of those things is you don't know, and like, but sometimes that's the risk in documentary filmmaking for the most part. If you're capturing something that's like a work in progress, like there's obviously films that you can do that are based on archival footage, as somebody's story that's already happened, and that has its own challenges, mostly in the edit. But when you're actually capturing, you're out trying to like see if a story happens. There's a lot of risk because nothing could happen. It could be the most boring, anticlimactic.
Well, and it can be exhausting too, because you're constantly looking for what the story might end up being, and then you're trying to figure out, okay, well, how far do I go down this rabbit hole? Like I remember on my first documentary when I was in Yemen, I was like, there was so many different things happening in Yemen at that time. It was 2011. The Arab Spring was just unfolding. There was a massive Somali population that was at risk in Yemen. There was just so many stories, and I would interview people, and I would be like, oh, this is good. This is good stuff. And then I'd be like, oh, wait, this doesn't really have anything to do with breakdancing, or like how's this gonna fit? Yeah, and so that can be exhausting too, of knowing what road to go down, because some of the best documentaries I've ever seen are films where they started filming one thing and then it really ended up becoming something entirely other, and they like followed Alice down the rabbit hole, and it really pays off. So you never really know what's going to end up paying off, and maybe the thing you set off to do wasn't the better documentary. So
right, yeah. With ours, it was with minimalism. It was tough because it was these guys going on tour talking about living a simple life. That's like sounds like the most boring idea in the fucking world. Yeah. And so it was challenging. And then we really use them as a through line, other talking head interviews to explain other elements of this movement. But then it was like starting to see that there's building momentum, and like people are starting to come out, and it's growing, and more people are connecting with it. But even that, like, that's cool. But it's not like, it's kind of a, it's what happened. That's the story. But man, it would have been cooler like if some other shit like happened that really like made it. But that's the thing is, and I think that's the thing about having integrity as a filmmaker too, is that like you can't force something to happen. You just have to let it happen and see how it unfolds.
Well, and I think it also takes having a perception of like those in between human moments that are going to end up resonating with people. Like, there's so many documentaries where I've watched it and it's been, maybe it wasn't the most well done film ever, but then there's some really human moment that the filmmaker had this gut, like, this is a good moment, this is something we should sit with, and then that one thing kind of saves the whole film. You can't only be committed to like the 3-act structure, or like having like, your hero's journey happen. Like you have to be a filmmaker. You have to be thinking like a filmmaker and thinking almost like someone who is writing a script. Like, what is the emotional core of this film, and what are those little in-between moments that are going to help like resonate with an audience and make them actually walk away caring? Because if you just have the facts there and you just have sort of this like robotic structure, I've done that before and it doesn't work. Like, audiences are at the same time dumb and really smart, and they don't always know how to articulate it. Like, a test audience doesn't always know how to articulate what's missing, but they know in their gut. We're a population of people that go to movies all the time or watch movies all the time, and we have a sense of when something's working and when something isn't.
That's a great point. I think I've noticed that in the feedback that I've gotten, even from co-producers and people that are close to the film, family and friends. They'll give me feedback, and then I have to kind of decode it. Like, what does that mean? Because you're right, they are both at the same time. They are, I would say, ignorant to understand what, not in like a bad way, but just like they don't have any experience filmmaking, so they don't know how to articulate. The pacing was a little bit quick. It felt a little bit rushed. Yeah. You know what I mean? But then they're like, I don't know, it just felt off. Yeah. Like, it felt like I don't know. Like, so you have to try to figure out. Actually, there's a great
note behind the note.
Right. There was a great example of when I was shooting the doc Design Disruptors. One of the design leaders was saying how somebody came to him and said, "Hey, we really need to make this thing. We need to make this thing bold. We need to, change that font to be more bold." And then he said, "Well, why do you want it to be bold?" And then it came to be that they needed it to be more pronounced. Yeah. And you're like, well, there is 100 different ways that you can make something more pronounced. You could take away from outside of it. Like, just making it bold is just one way to get it done. Yeah. So it's hard to decode. I had Joe, I'm going to screw up his last name, Beshenkovsky. He edited the Zen Diaries of Gary Shandling, objectified a bunch of amazing documentaries. But he said he actually said,
Objectified is so good.
Isn't it phenomenal? Yeah. And I'm just, those docs, I'm like, and I was watching the Gary Shandling doc, I'm like, this dude is a master of editing.
I haven't seen that one yet, but
it's really good. Yeah. It's 4.5 hours long because it's a 2-part spot. And it's like, just the editing is super masterful, but then like also to understand like him and his process, and like, he's like, it was like, you have moments where you're so challenged and you're like, how the fuck do I go from, where do I go from here? I don't know how to solve this problem. I don't know how to continue this film. But then it's all about, you keep going.
I have such a respect for editors. That's a whole other conversation.
The editing is next level. And that's what's going to make a documentary for sure. But he was saying, which surprised me, but he said, keep your audience guessing or keep them on their toes. Like, don't hold their hand through the entire story. Like, don't tease them and like don't kind of build something up and then just like ignore it.
Yeah.
Like, but have the story carry them through in a way that they're always kind of like, oh, where is this going? Where is this going? And that's a real art.
I mean, audiences have a gut for setups and payoffs. They don't always know how to articulate that, but whether you like it or not, or whether you mean to or not, you're sort of throughout your film setting up mini setups and payoffs, or not paying it off, and audiences sense that. And when I've done like test screenings, what I've noticed is a lot of people will be like, they'll write on their form or they'll say in the Q&A after, like, I didn't like this part. And as a filmmaker, that like, I don't like this thing, either if it's a note from an audience member or a note from an exec, that's not a good note. Like, that's not a good note to receive, because you're like, well, I made this film, like, you don't like that thing.
Yeah.
but then you have to go back and be like, okay, they didn't like that part. Usually it's not that they didn't like that part, it's that something about it wasn't working, or that it came right after something that wasn't working. Like, I've found that if I just look at what the note was and I say, okay, well, they didn't like when so-and-so said such and such, and I look at what's around it, and usually there's a cluster of notes all around that same area, and you have to kind of like look at it almost like you're looking at an impressionist painting and be like, oh, okay, everyone seems to be bothered by this one scene, but everyone had a slightly different way of talking about it. And then you have to wade through, like, okay, well, I know that I don't fully agree with their note, but I know that clearly there's a unanimous thing about this section, and then figure out what that is. And oftentimes it's not cutting out the thing that people don't like, it's cutting out the thing before it.
Wow. Yeah, I never thought about that. But yeah, that's the challenging thing, and that's the tough thing when I get feedback is I think you have to kind of be very thoughtful about the feedback that comes in. And like, well, is this feedback coming from my parents? Maybe they're biased. Maybe they're just going to love everything I do. Is this a YouTube comment? Is this somebody that's just trying to troll me and that doesn't have my best interest at heart? And I think that, like, you as a filmmaker, you have to, or just a creative in general, you have to decide, like, do I want to listen to this feedback? And if you keep hearing the same thing over and over again, maybe there's some merit to it. And like you said, maybe it's not just removing it completely, but it's figuring out how to work around it, how to change it subtly to make your point.
Yeah. And we self-sabotage so often because we get committed to this idea that we have. We're like, oh, I always wanted to have this thing in here. And then maybe it's not working, or maybe, like, you have to, unfortunately, sometimes kill your babies for the greater good of the story. But
yeah, that'll be the name of the podcast.
Kill your babies.
Kill your babies. No, you got to do it though. That's the hardest thing, and that's the thing is, like, I always will end up creating when I realize that I'm going to take a story, whether it's a small film or a feature, like, I'm like, all right, I think I'm actually going to take this in a different direction. You just create a second version because you're like, I want to save that. I want that to be there because there was a lot of work that went into that. If I am wrong about this gut feeling, then I just wasted a lot of fucking time. So then I'll start going down this path. And usually that's the path that's the right one, is the one that just takes you a little bit further. You trim some stuff down. You may cut some stuff out or add some new stuff in. But it's like, it's always progressing in the right way. Yeah.
I don't know if you'd agree with this, but I've talked to young people that want to be filmmakers, like college students or whatever. I'll like have coffee with them, and I always tell them that the first movie they make, the first documentary they make, whether it's a short or ideally a longer short, so there's time to unpack and do some amount of story structure, should be about a person, like a single person, rather than about an idea. Because when you do a story about a single person, it sort of locks you in. It's a good first step. It's sort of like learning how to walk before you can ride a bike or something. Like you're forced into dealing with, on some level, the hero's journey. Like, you kind of have to use some traditional storytelling and say, okay, well, I'm going to introduce my character. Here's the thing they're trying to accomplish or the struggle that they have. And I feel like you then can, like, sort of learn how, on a more limited scale, how to tell a story in an arc that's going to resonate and have like an emotional core and have an emotional arc, and then go do a subject, which can be a lot harder because you're like, okay, well, I'm going to do a film about modern architecture. There's a million ways you can do that, and you've got to somehow keep people locked into it.
Dude, I love that. That's amazing advice. And I think it's actually, even if you're going to do a big idea doc, you need characters. And every film needs characters, people that have personality. Like, you don't want to have a sit-down interview where somebody's so just bland and dry. And, you know, you want somebody... And that's like, if you look at documentaries like Helvetica or Objectified, like, they include the unpolished, off-the-cuff moments where they're sitting down. Like, am I looking at the camera or am I looking at you? And it's like... That's why I'm saying like always roll. Just like start rolling before the person sits down. You have that moment, the genuine interaction. You have like the clip of the soundboard or whatever, and it's like those are the moments people want to see. There was like, I think it was Helvetica where like they just had this great designer staring directly in the camera, and he's like, so you just want me to keep staring at the camera? And it's like a really funny moment, and it's just like random, but they kind of created it. It was there, and it was. Look for those opportunities and look for characters. And like you said, like if you're going to do a project, start with the character first. Yeah. And then... having an eye out for the characters that you know that inevitably the audience is going to end up being like, I really loved that old man with the guy that was smoking the cigarettes the whole time. Or like, you know, because even if it's not your most important knowledgeable expert or whatever, people can't help it. They're going to latch onto that person. And I also think that there's this huge art form, which I'm always learning, but I love getting better at, of making a subject feel comfortable in the right way. And obviously, like, again, if you're doing like a hard-hitting political takedown, then it's different. You kind of want to make your subject uncomfortable. But if you're trying to make someone feel at home who doesn't normally do interviews, I love that as well, of like, okay, well, I tell my DP and my sound guy, like, we're not going to slate on this, or we're going to slate well in advance, and we're going to like warm him up, basically. Like, I'm just gonna start talking to him, and before he knows it, he's gonna be in the interview because he didn't even know we were rolling. And learning that, like, some of it is playing tricks on your subject a little bit, but learning the technique of helping a subject feel like they can be themselves, because that they're going to be more articulate and be more interesting when they can be themselves most of the time. Right. And then be willing to maybe change it up, because maybe you're like, sit down interview. They just, for whatever reason, when they're in front of the camera and the light's on, they just stiffen up. Yeah. And then you're like, all right, maybe we just, walk around. Maybe, maybe we pick it up and we do this run and gun, or maybe we do this interview twice. Like, there's definitely, don't be afraid to change things when something doesn't feel right or not working out. And also, don't be afraid to just cut out an entire interview. Like, you spent an entire day, like you had crew, and like you had this interview planned for months, but then you realize it doesn't work. It doesn't fit in the documentary. Yeah. That's one of the kill your babies things, where it's like, that's a tough one. You think about the time, the energy, all that went into it, and then you're like, sorry, it doesn't work. Yeah. And that's hard to tell that person too.
I know. And I've had, in my second documentary, I had interviewees that got cold feet because they just didn't want to be, there were consequences to being in the film, and I had to just cut one guy. Not be like, could I have kept him in ethically? Probably, but it was sort of needed to honor his request, and I just had to take him out. And it was a good interview. It was an important character, but
I actually had the same thing happen in Design Disruptors, where a company decided to pull out.
Really?
Because somebody was no longer working at the company.
And really?
We got personal release forms. And I'm not going to say the name of the company. Very large company, very powerful. They have a whole team of lawyers. And we were like, it's just not worth it. Like, we're not going to fight them on this. Yeah. So we got one of their competitors and just replaced them in the film. Like, over the span of 2 weeks, it was like, all right, let's go out to San Francisco. Let's shoot this interview, and let's, recut it. Which was like so challenging, and just like the last thing you want to do. It was actually the night before we had picture lock and color grade.
Oh my gosh.
It was like we had it, and I was actually like waiting for the okay to like,
why does every doc have one of those stories where you're like right before picture lock, some shit happens, some shit,
everything falls apart, and then you're like, oh Jesus. Because it's, dude, to like talk about the amount of work that goes into these longer form projects that take years to put together, it's just like, you just are so ready to be done.
Well, do you operate from a paper edit? Do you go and make when you're going to go into it? Do you work with an editor, or like, what's your, like, on
the
both?
One I did on Design Disruptors, I did, because we had a budget for it, but Minimalism, I cut it.
You cut yourself. So what were those two experiences like? I had the same for me. First
Yeah.
one I cut,
Oh,
second
you did?
one I had an editor.
Totally different ball game. When I did it myself, and like that's how I had started out. I was just like a freelance independent filmmaker. Everything I shot, I edited. So there is an element of like self-direction that you don't have to speak what I want to articulate. I don't actually have to say it just because I know it. I think it and then I do it and I put it into practice.
Yeah.
When you are working with an editor, when you're working with a team, a DP, you then have the new challenge of having to articulate your ideas and win them over. Because then, you know, your DP, like one of my very good friends that shot with me, he may be like, I don't think we should do that. But then I have to actually be able to voice my opinion and say, no, I really think it should be because of this.
It forces, and a lot of people crumble under this. It forces you to have to deal with your insecurities, because everyone has them. And I think some directors will, to make up for the fact that they're insecure or to avoid getting pushback, they'll become like maniacal and just like be an asshole on set or just be non-collaborative. And then there's other people that will just unnecessarily cave to anything that their crew or editor wants. And I think that there's sort of a in between of knowing that you have a point of view and there's a reason you're directing this thing, but also being willing to kind of have that feedback and know that you hired your DP for a reason too. And that's because your DP is good. You know, I worked with an editor. I actually worked with her on both docs. I mostly edited my first doc, but she came in at the end and then she worked.
This is Mariana?
This is Mariana Blanco.
Yeah, she's actually going to be on the podcast.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, I'm talking to her like next week.
She's so great. And she said something to me that I loved that has always stuck with me. There was this really, really late night on my first doc where we were working, trying to get to picture lock. And I am an editor as well. I've edited a lot of my own stuff. And we were just like 3 a.m, stressed out, frustrated, not communicating the best. And she's at the wheel, but I'm like trying to explain to her something that I wanted her to do, and I can't even remember what it was at this point. And I was like, can I just take the wheel for a second? And she let me, and I like quickly did what I was trying to explain to her, but I felt like icky, like felt bad that I had done that. And I apologized to her the next day. Like we eventually like all went to bed and it was just like, okay, it's too late to be working right now. And the next day I was like, I'm sorry yesterday that I like took the keyboard away from you. And she was like, yeah, you know, she's like, it's fine. But she was like, there's something to learning how to articulate what you want to your crew. Like there's actually, that is something you have to learn. That isn't something that just comes naturally. And I took that to heart, and I've really, working with an editor on docs, that I've applied that to working on set, whether it's with actors or with a larger crew, on commercial projects, on other stuff. That's a really important skill to hone, is not to just assume that everyone can read your mind. And when you're doing the run and gun smaller stuff where you're editing, directing, and producing the whole thing, shooting the whole thing, you can just live in your own head and you know what you mean. But learning how to talk about what you mean is it's not easy, and you have to practice it.
Yeah, and I think it starts at the beginning. It's like letting that crew know. And I've certainly made this mistake before, where for commercial stuff or even doc stuff, where we set out and my crew only has a vague idea of what we're shooting that day, or a vague idea of what the big picture is. Yeah. And that stuff is important because I think the crew, first of all, just wants to know that they're a part of something. They want to know, it matters what I'm filming. It matters what I'm creating and what I'm recording sound for. So that's important. But then also like just to then when something comes up, when a question comes up later, like, well, why do we want to shoot this interview in this sit down way when we could do it this way? It's like, oh, because that's what, every other interview was like during this doc, or like it all makes sense because you already articulated what you wanted from the very beginning. Yeah. Which isn't always so straightforward. I mean, it's always a learning lesson. And I think that's the thing, like you said, you just can't have an ego about it. Yeah. You just have to be able to listen to other people, take people's advice, and know how to communicate.
Yeah, you have to, I remember watching at Austin Film Festival, I saw P.T. Anderson and Jonathan Demme interview each other. 2 great directors, not... P.T. Anderson's never made docs, but Jonathan Demme's made a ton of docs. Both of them have very different styles of working, and P.T. Anderson's sort of the auteur, where he's like, I have my point of view, and I'm gonna just tell everyone to fall in line. Whereas Jonathan Demme is very collaborative, and a lot of his films, like Rachel Getting Married, are kind of doc style, where he doesn't have there's not a script per se. And I remember thinking about those two things, and I'm like, I don't want to be a full Jonathan Demme, and I don't want to be a full P.T. Anderson. Like, I want to be able to be a bit of an auteur where I do have a vision. I know what I want, and people are confident that even when it seems crazy, I know what this guy can do, and I trust that he's going to make the right decisions, even though I maybe can't picture it. But I also, if there's a problem, I want to like collaborate on how to solve it, or if there's, and that's where Jonathan Demme pointed out, is he's like, if there's a problem on set, it's usually not one person's problem. Like, it's usually not one person went awry. It's usually like several people or some circumstance or some line that isn't working, and gathering the team and saying, okay, how can we make this scene work? Whether that's on a doc, in an interview, or on a feature. Like, I think that a certain amount of collaboration is crucial.
I want to talk about briefly how these projects came about, and then I want to tap into a little bit of the commercial work you do as well, freelancing, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Hopefully give some advice to people who are trying to make a living in the business, which is super important. This is part of it too, is like, how did you get funding for these 2 docs that you made?
Yeah.
And how did the process of actually making them come about?
Yeah. First doc I started working on in 2009. It took me like 7 years to make. So I'm not saying I recommend that for everyone, but it's like, that's the note of, well, if you're, I started making docs, I think, because I could. Like, I was like, oh, I don't need to wait for someone to tell me to do this. Like, if you want to be a doc filmmaker, like, you can pick up any camera and go do it. And that's what, like, kind of the beauty of it. So I think on a certain level, like, if you really care about becoming a documentary filmmaker, like, you kind of need to be willing to bankroll stuff on your own a little bit, or do things incrementally, put stuff on a credit card. For me, it was just booking a flight and going to East Africa, which, cost a little bit of money, but at the end of the day, didn't cost a lot. And then it just was time and getting outside of my comfort zone. So when I started working on that doc, it was all self-funded. Went into some debt for it too, but also just put money away when I did other non-exciting, non-sexy jobs. And then toward the end, because Shake the Dust, which was my first documentary, has a pretty cool soundtrack with a lot of good hip-hop music on it. Nas came on board to executive produce it, which was really helpful in helping secure like some additional financing to close it out, and to bring Mariana in to edit the final cut, and to we were able to get a lot of really good music for really, really inexpensively.
You can't, like, the kind of music you had in there from Nas to Common, it's like, you can't have that music in without having a connection.
Yeah. And we couldn't have, I couldn't have paid for that myself, but we also couldn't have afforded it even with the money that we raised without, having that goodwill. And also it was a subject matter that people cared about, it was like, there was some heart to it, or a lot of heart to it. And so then that film, kind of bought me some, I guess, street cred to then have another investor be like, okay, well, and I had been working with this nonprofit organization called Liberty in North Korea that works with repatriating North Korean refugees, and they knew this artist named Sun Moo, and they were like, I was in Korea, in Seoul, and they're like, this is a really cool guy, you should maybe do a documentary about him. And they introduced me to him, and I went to his studio, and I was like, yeah, no, I'm in, this is awesome. That was in 2012. And one of their primary board members and donors is a guy named Blaine Vess, who's an executive producer on my second film, who came in for the first 2/3 of the financing for that film. So I was able to, that got me through the first year and a half of production to be able to just start shooting. And
what would you do? You said you were working on a narrative project. Like, for future projects, how would you go about
getting financing together?
Securing financing? And I mean, because that's such a big part of it. I mean, for me, like, when I first started out, securing financing meant just paying myself. But now it means hiring the editor I want to hire, getting the music I want to get, the composer. Like, it means a lot more than just paying your salary.
Well, and I would also say that and I hope this isn't a depressing thing to say, but my mentality about documentary has shifted too. Like before, I had this naive ambition that I would somehow like put a lot of my own personal time and money into this project, and then I would sell it and it would pay off. And I think you can't really have that mentality with a doc. Like hopefully you do sell it to Netflix or to HBO, but even when you do, especially if you've brought in equity, you're gonna have to pay your investors back first, and it can take a while before you see a dime, if ever. So you also need to be thinking about, how am I going to pay myself? How am I going to survive on the budget of this film, so that if it's a bigger project, so that I'm not relying on this somehow being my retirement plan.
Dude, that's a great point though too, because in seeing it, I think every creative art, you need to also see the business side of it and how to make this sustainable.
Yeah.
Because like, yeah, dude, like if your parents are paying you a salary and you could just run out and make films about fairies, like that's totally go for it. You know, do whatever you want.
Good for that person.
Yeah, but like for the rest of us, where you actually need to make money doing it, there is an art and a skill, and I think a practicality of staying small.
Yeah.
And like doing minimalism on the budget that we had it on, which was all just like self-funded, you know, pulling up $10,000, $20,000 to put it together. That worked out way better for us in the end because we were able to do it ourselves.
Yeah, and I think so. In terms of the actual practicality of going out and getting that money, it's just sitting down with a lot of different people. It's networking a ton, depending on what town you live in, or what city you're near, or what your personal network is. It's looking at your entire network and saying, okay, who do I know, or who do I know that might know other people? Maybe it's making a giant list and saying, you know, and then it's, you know, if the story you care about, which it has to be. Unless you're lucky enough to be just hired by the History Channel because you're a great doc director and they need you. Like, we're probably talking about someone who's going after a story that they care about. Then you just have to go down that list and meet with every single one of them and convince them that not only is the story worth telling, but there's some kind of a business model around it that makes sense. And you know, it behooves I just believe we live in an age now, much like what has happened with the record industry, where it behooves every filmmaker to be an entrepreneur, or to be a business person, and to know, like, if you don't know a lick about the business side of filmmaking, don't start your movie yet. Then go figure some of that out. Learn how to make a line item budget and know how to make it as cheaply as you can to still do it well. You know, I think, I'm not going to say it on here, but I like have a number in my head of what I think a documentary should responsibly be made for if it doesn't have real talent attached to it. Like, it's not about Justin Bieber. It doesn't have Forrest Whitaker as an EP on it. But that's another thing, is if you have good enough network or some amount of access to get some kind of talent attached to go.
Yeah, that's another way to go about it.
Yeah, and that's
actually, it's not even like. You know, when you think of talent, you might think of the Justin Biebers, like the really high profile people, but that really helped. I mean, that was everything for us with minimalism, because Josh and Ryan they were producers, but they were also like the talent, or the on-camera talent on film. It's weird to call them talent, but you know what I mean? Like they were the characters in the film, and they had an audience, and they had a growing and large audience. So like now with Instagram and social media, like you have a lot of people who have followings, they're fitness people, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And you yourself have a skill as a filmmaker. If you can team up with those people, you have an audience already ready and willing to pay for a project from them.
Well, I mean, and it's, you know, with my first film, when Nas was on board, you know, people would say like, well, what did Nas really do? Like, was he really that involved? Well, I'm like, okay, well, he was an executive producer. It's very common in the industry that executive producers aren't a part of the day-to-day of creating a film. Nas actually was more involved than he even needed to be. Like, he came to screenings and gave feedback and was, you know, very generous at the time, but that wasn't why I brought him on. And I think people miss the point of, you know, when my mom was like, oh, this like news article came out and it was all about Nas and they barely mentioned you. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's
why we brought him on.
That's why he's a part of it, is because Rolling Stone isn't going to do a story about Adam Sjoberg. They're going to do a story about Nas. But
it's so valuable to have that. I mean, because you want your idea to be heard and you want to be able to share your stories, and there's more than one way to do it.
Yeah.
Commercial work. when did you start getting into commercial work, getting like working with brands? It seems like you have a pretty good connection in terms of the travel and doing what you're passionate about, but also including brands into that to make some money.
And this is an ongoing conversation for myself too. You know, I've never been represented. I've never had an agent. I've never had a commercial agent. It's something I've maybe now reconsidering. But it was always kind of a growing word of mouth relationship based business for me, where one brand would hire me like really, really early on when Warby Parker, the glasses company, was just 10 people in an office. I went with the founders to India and shot with them, and then, then continued once they grew to do work for them. And then, they recommended me to Project Red, which is Bono's, or, specifically under the One campaign. It's his effort in Africa to fight HIV. So then I've worked with Product Red for 4 or 5 years now. And that's all based on a combination of that relationship, but then also being, I think, the value, and I'm not trying to say that I'm like the awesomest, most fun, interesting person ever, but the value of being good to work with is huge. It's like people almost want you to be good to work with more than they even want you to be super talented, and especially if you're doing international travel where you're in East Africa and you're shooting under challenging circumstances, you're in, walking through a refugee camp. You want to be with people that can handle that are able to be malleable and go with the flow and work hard and not complain after a 10-hour day in the hot sun. Like, just having a good work ethic, having a good attitude goes a really long way in kind of maintaining those relationships, which then are how I continue to get commercial work.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers your question.
100%. Like, you have to deliver, but apart from that,
right.
Like, who do you want in the bunker with you? Like,
exactly.
When shit gets hard, when things are difficult, you want somebody who can communicate, who can... that's one of the things I learned early on is like just being a good person to work with, being a joy, being quick to reply to your client, like delivering on time or before time. Like, those things make such a big difference.
For sure.
And that's like you said, that's why they recommend you to other people.
Yeah.
It's not just because you're a killer filmmaker or photographer and you're like making awesome content. It's because of everything else that backs it up. It's because like I've made recommendations before for people to crew up others, and it didn't work out that well because I didn't really have an experience working with them. And now I will never give a recommendation for somebody unless I'm 100% certain that they can deliver and that the person will actually enjoy working with them.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's actually sometimes hard for that reason to give recommendations, because it's either someone that I don't want someone to steal from me or I'm like, I don't know. Like I would maybe hire that person again, but I don't know,
Yeah, like you have to be certain. If you're not totally certain, be like, all right, well, I'll think about it. I'll let you know if somebody comes up. But that's your reputation as well when you're recommending other people.
That's the thing I didn't realize early on when people would say, hey, can you recommend me for this thing? Or even, can you write a recommendation letter for me? It's like, oh, I'm not just like doing you a solid. I'm putting my own taste out there of like the kind of people that I want to work with or the kind of content I create.
When you're, say, putting together budgets or talking with clients about what you're going to charge for a specific project, how do you enter those kind of conversations? When does it usually come up? And how do you go about them?
That's a great question. And it's interesting because I just had 3 separate jobs come in all at the same time. It's April, and I feel like there's always a little bit of a lag with commercial work at the beginning of the year when people are just getting their budgets and they're just coming out of the holidays where they spend all their like 2017 budget. All this work comes in at the beginning of April, and I was budgeting things out, and part of it is like, if it's a returning client, I usually I look back, okay, what was my fee for this client before? Because I try to have a generally set fee. Like I try not to just pull fee, like day rates or whatever it is, or budgets out of a hat, obviously. But different clients merit slightly different budgets. There are certain clients that I know they're scrappy. I know, whether it's a nonprofit where I'm like, okay, I know I'm going to be cutting them a little bit of a deal here. I'm still going to pay myself what I like at a minimum, what I believe I should make. But I have a set fee. I have a set, if it's a project, if it's a smaller project where it's going to be me and one or two other people, I have a set fee for all of those roles. If it's a very large project, let's say $250,000 budget for a large, a very big company, then again, we have, like, the way that usually works is we have line item, like, and when I say we, I'm talking about my producing partners who do a lot. When I'm directing it, they handle a lot of the putting together the budget, but we have a set fee, and then we also try and make our money on underages. So we're gonna say this is what the budget is for this, and it's an honest number, but we're also gonna negotiate every single line on that budget. And really our producer fee, what our company brings in, is going to be on the underages from that budget, if that makes sense.
What do you mean underage?
So we're budgeting $10,500 for our editor, but we're going to try and cut a deal with our editor and get him for $7,500, or cut a deal with our editor, or try and get it done quicker so that we don't have our editor for as many days or whatever. Because I'll try and build in my own director's fee, but my company is going to kind of make or break on whether or not we can go under budget on a lot of projects.
And you need to actually make a profit as well. Like,
exactly.
So then you can reinvest in the company. Like
exactly.
Companies, for them to grow or to even stay steady, you can't just like pay everybody out and yourself out and that's it. Like, you need, if you're going to buy gear or crew, or you're going to hire employees or get an office space, this stuff costs money.
Well, and I think a good producer, business person, it's not about cutting corners that you shouldn't cut. You always have to like stand behind the product that you're creating, but a good business person who's a producer on a commercial level, or whether it's music videos, especially music videos, which I haven't done any, thank goodness, because it's really hard to make money doing that. But you have to learn how to make something look really good, but know where you can cut back, or where you I've seen this happen a lot with producers that have just been in the business too long, where they think they need a lot of bells and whistles that they don't need. And I think my producing partners and I have been really good at being like, how can we do this really well and efficiently, and not crew up where we don't need to, but make sure that everyone's taken care of and that we're not just eating pizza,
Right. Dude, isn't that so important, just to take care of the crew? Yeah. And that's the thing, is that, and people can sometimes fall into this trap where you're like always just trying to work and operate under the smallest budget possible, where you're sacrificing the well-being of your crew, or like the hours are unreasonable. And it's like, those things are really important to think about. And
and especially on a commercial project, because if you're working on an independent film where it's like a $500K feature, you can get really creative, and people will put in long hours, especially if it's a non-union job. People will put in long hours because they're like, this is a cool film, or this is like, maybe this will be the thing that, like, as a DP, that like gets me my bigger job or whatever. But it's on a commercial job, like a lot of these people that are showing up, they're just there to just do their job and go home. Like they're not really benefiting much. This isn't like something they can add to their reel, right? Especially if they're a gaffer, and so taking care of people is for sure really important.
One more question, then we'll get into quick questions, which is a little segment we got to wrap up the podcast. What advice would you give to freelancers or, filmmakers, creatives that are just starting out, that are trying to make a living as a freelancer? Like, what should they be thinking about very early on?
So I'd go back to learning some of the business stuff, knowing, like, if I could do it over again, I would have taken, if not majored in business, I would go back and have taken more business classes in school, because there was a bigger learning curve. I think knowing how to run a budget, knowing how to manage a business is important. But that's kind of a no-brainer. The other thing I was thinking of was, which maybe is also a no-brainer, but I'm beginning to think more and more that it's not, learning how to say yes to things, seeing the opportunity in the unsexy opportunities. Like you and I were talking about back in the day, like shooting weddings and all that we learned from shooting weddings. Like that was invaluable. And I had a group of students from my alma mater come and like come, they were graduating from college and they were all photography students, and it was like a Q&A of like, what is it like to be a business person in this job? And I brought up wedding photography to all of them, or wedding filmmaking, and they all across the board were like, no, I want to do fashion photography, I want to do journalism, I want to do this. I'm like, yeah, you can go do those things, but like you need to make money as well, and you will absolutely learn a lot, and you will absolutely make money if you get into wedding photography. That is something that is recession proof. Like so and I still say yes to unsexy things. I try to say yes to things that I'm ethically okay with, but like but I shoot, one of my like go-to clients is a produce company, and I love them. They're great. They're good to me. The projects we work on are actually cool. Like I get to go hang out with farmers in Mexico and eat like the best steak ever, and they pay me well. So and I always learn something, and I get the opportunity to try new equipment and try new ideas, and they give me a lot of leeway in how I tell the story. They let me write the script essentially and shoot it how I want. They have their basic kind of, this is what we need to communicate, and that stuff has gone on to be featured by Whole Foods and stuff like that. So, and if I had just been like, no, I'm not going to shoot for a produce distribution company, then I wouldn't, there's a lot of opportunity and money earned that I would have missed. So learning how to kind of, especially up front, say yes to everything, but then put in your reel what you want to shoot,
yeah, that's huge.
Communicate to people what you can do, but not be afraid to take opportunities.
When I was doing the weddings, that was all over. You could see in all my work that there was weddings. It was in my reel. It was like on my website. And then once I decided I didn't want to do it anymore, I had to wipe it off from the face of the internet. And I'm like, because I don't want to get weddings. I think that it would, at that point when I was trying to do more startup companies, tech companies, they don't want to see that I'm doing weddings. So it's like, it served me well for that time. Yeah. But like you said, so important to make sure that the work that you've done in the past is the work you're going to get in the future.
Well, and can I add to that? This may seem like obscure advice, but it worked really well for me. So I started doing weddings on my own, and then a good friend of mine was a very successful wedding photographer, and he asked me to come on to his studio and be a shooter for him, but shoot my own weddings, but under the umbrella of his studio. That was awesome. Not only did a lot of my overhead get covered, there was a staff now working on my behalf to book weddings. I didn't have to do any of the kind of biz dev stuff. And when I moved away from doing wedding photography, I didn't have to rebrand myself. Like I had already been building separately my own separate commercial documentary filmmaking brand, and my wedding work was all under the umbrella of another person's name.
Yeah, there's a good part of that and a bad part of that. Like it really just depends on what you want to get out of it. But I had the same thing. One of my friends had a wedding film company. He booked out all these weddings. I've probably done a couple dozen weddings under his company, and it's great if you want to get experience as a filmmaker or photographer and make money for the day that you put into it. And what I eventually stepped away from that to do weddings more on my own, because when I was able to shoot it, edit it, produce it, like I could
make more money,
make a lot more money. And then also, if I wanted to, at that time I was planning on building that business out to be a larger thing. You own those clients, and those clients will recommend you, not your friend's company.
You would only want to do it if with the right person, and if you eventually didn't want to do wedding photography anymore, which I think I knew.
Yeah. All right. Let's get to quick questions. Speaking about, just kind of taking that business side seriously, has there been a book that's impacted you the most, or that you've learned from about freelancing and taking a non-traditional path?
Oh man. Oh man. I don't read a lot of like books about the business. So a book that has impacted my career. You might have to edit out a long pause on this one. I read a lot, but I read a lot of like
you don't do a lot of the self-help entrepreneurial type books?
I don't. I mean, I read...
So what, I guess just in general too, then, what kind of inspires you and has inspired you?
So yeah, I mean, I remember reading, this is going to sound so random, and if I had more time to think about this, I'd probably give a different answer, but the biography of Elon Musk impacted me a lot. Just seeing... it wasn't an autobiography, so it was one person's take on him, but seeing tenacity and, I tend to think that you do well in any career, and especially in the film world, when you can kind of step outside the matrix or realize that everyone's kind of playing a game. And I think that applies to a lot of other fields. Like when you can realize that there's rules to learn and there's rules to break, and that success kind of comes from learning when to keep the rules and when to realize that they're complete bullshit. And Elon Musk's life is, I mean, he's a very imperfect person, but he's definitely someone who knows when to keep the rules and when to break them.
I love that. What drives you?
Honestly, curiosity. That's maybe a bit of a cliche, but curiosity. And that's why I love to travel, and that's why travel and documentary filmmaking go so well together, because it's all about curiosity. Mm-hmm. Am I supposed to give like one word answers?
No, yeah, not really. I don't know. I have no idea. This is the only segment I've been doing, and normally it's just kind of, I guess it's just an easier way. I think I first started it because I was like, ooh, this would be a good way to get sound bites for teasers and stuff.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, that's not really why I do it anymore.
Should I answer in the form of a question? Like, should I answer with the question in my answer? Like,
no.
Curiosity
Right.
drives me.
Yeah. But I think lately I just do it because it's kind of a nice, fun way to... I think I need to develop a few more of these, but a way to kind of get some more pointed questions that have something valuable that the audience can act on towards the end. A couple more here. What's the simplest advice that's the most important to follow?
In life or as a filmmaker?
Man, both.
The simplest advice that's the most important to follow: be kind. I think that applies to life and to work. I think kindness is... you will win so many people over, and whether it's your subject matter or just people in life, from the barista to whoever. Like, kindness goes really far.
2 more questions. What one thing should people read, watch, or listen to before they go to bed tonight?
Read, watch, or listen to before they go to bed tonight. Well, I don't think that you should read anything political right now before you go to bed.
Yeah, come on, you don't need that.
I just started keeping my phone in the living room. I don't even sleep next to my phone anymore.
So you don't wake up to an alarm?
I have Alexa, which most people would be creeped out by, but I have like an Alexa dot by my bed, and I just say, Alexa, set alarm for 7 a.m., and then at 7 a.m. my alarm goes off.
That's pretty cool.
You could replace it with you could have an old-fashioned alarm clock too. I just don't use my phone for my alarm.
Yeah, but those have just like the one like nobody wants to wake up to that.
Yeah,
shit.
Alexa's alarm, the template basic alarm is very soothing and very nice to wake up to. Cool. Okay, wait, one thing before people go to bed tonight they should watch is the episode of Chef's Table that takes place in Slovenia.
Which season is this?
It's season should I look it up real quick?
Yeah, sure.
Let's turn my phone
on. Season 2, episode 5. Does that make sense?
What is it?
Anna Rose.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Miracle Dishes.
So the thing that people should watch before they go to bed tonight is not something political, but they should watch season 2, episode 5 of Chef's Table on Netflix, which is Anna Rose, and I don't know the name of her restaurant, but she's from Slovenia. And the reason I say that is because, first of all, I think before you go to bed, you should be, if you're going to consume anything, you should consume something that's going to be that isn't going to keep your mind spinning. And she just has a beautiful spirit as a chef. And Slovenia is just stunning, and it's everything that is good about Chef's Table, like the food, the all-encompassing. To me, food and travel are like one and the same in a way, and I think that show taps into that a little bit. I think people underestimate how much Chef's Table is actually about travel and locations. But man, that episode is just, I watch it regularly, just that one, because it's almost meditative for me.
That's great, man. I'm going to check that out. Cool. Well, thank you so much for doing the podcast. Last question here to close us out. What's the best way for people to find you online?
Looseluggage.com, LOOSE luggage.com. It's been around. It's been my moniker forever, and so I just haven't gotten rid of it.
Awesome,
Loose Luggage
man.
on Instagram, Loose Luggage on everything.
Great, man. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And that's it. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. I feel like I need like a catchphrase or something, like go get 'em, make it fast. No, keep jiving, keep jiving. I think that's racist. Keep doing the thing. Make it happen. I don't know. Ground up show. Fuck.